Welcome back to this week's Parent Parsha series, Parsha Pekudei, Chazak Chazak Benit Chazek. We have finished, or we are about to finish, Sefer Shmot, and we have done it mostly along the guide of Rashbam. And sometimes it just happens, it all comes together. And I was looking in my Tanakh at this week's Parsha, which is small. As I mentioned last week, we usually have Vayakel and Pekudei together, which is an extra opportunity for us to really focus on Pekudei, and also last week on Vayakel. And in the notes, it actually had in there a reflection of a shiur that I must have been in, and it cited the Rashbam. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's golden. This is going to be where this podcast, this video for Parsha that is ending our journey of raising kids with Rashbam in Sefer Shmot must be. So Pekudei is actually again, similar to Vayakel, a repetition of the building of the Mishkan. We get a summary. We hear a lot about the stones that are on the Choshen. We hear about the clothing of the Kohen. We hear about the silver coins and all the amount of silver coins that came and how they were allocated. And we finally come to the end of our parasha. And sure enough, the Mishkan is complete, and we encounter something that we are familiar with, but perhaps we don't always pay attention to, in terms of that this is the beginning of this story. We know that when the Beit HaMikdash, the first Beit HaMikdash, is complete, when Shlomo HaMelech goes, or when the Kohanim go to enter the Beit HaMikdash basically does not let them in. It says that the cloud of Hashem, the glory of Hashem, is filled, and the Kohanim cannot enter. And what proceeds to occur there in Melachim is that Shlomo basically kind of makes this very big speech invoking the name of David, his father, and as almost like a magical moment, the gates kiviyachol open up. And we find something similar by the Mishkan. So I at least always kind of have a hard time remembering that this happened in the Mishkan. I know that this is a story that is familiar to me in Melachim, but I forget that it actually is echoing something that has already happened. And that is the Beit HaMikdash, the Mishkan is complete, and Hashem acknowledges almost that this is a gift that he is accepting, that Bnei Yisrael have given to him. Moshe kind of takes a step back and looks at it and kind of sighs a deep kind of sense of satisfaction. He then gives the Jewish people the bracha, Vayhi Noam, according to the Mefarshim, that's the bracha that he gives them. It's very clear that he gives them a bracha. The question becomes, what bracha does he give them? Most come down on the side of Vayhi Noam. And there's a problem, which is that Moshe can't get into the Mishkan. And so, that might be, right? So, okay, so we know the text is very clear. Moshe can't get in. We're then told that when the Anan fills, when the glory of Hashem fills the Mishkan, that is when they stay put. And when it lifts, that's when they travel. And that's how we leave it. Sorry about that. That's how we leave it. And we get another description. Again, I'm just looking at the Tanakh itself. Ki anan Hashem al hamishkan yomam. During the daytime, the cloud of Hashem was on the Mishkan. Ve'esh ti'alayla. And it was in fire, pillar of fire at night. Le'nei kol Beit Yisrael, to the entire house of Yisrael. Beit is a significant piece of this story. B'chol ma'asehem, in all of their travels. But if you go literally, then that's how Sefer Shmot finishes. Moshe can't get in. The Mishkan is filled with the glory of Hashem. By daytime, it's a cloud. By night, it's a fire. And when it lifts, that's their signal to get themselves together and start moving. But v'lo yucha Moshe lavo al Moed. Moshe cannot get into the Ohel Moed. Now, if we fast forward to Bamidbar, we know that Moshe actually does get into the Ohel Moed, and we have Psukim that talk about Hashem talking from the Parochet. So it's all very confusing, and the Mefarshim try to understand this, and Rashi tries to understand it, and the Rashbam tries to understand it, and where they settle on is the fact that in the initial moments of the Mishkan being built, this is exactly what happened. The glory of Hashem was so overwhelming and so powerful and so big that it filled the space of the Mishkan. And no matter how close Moshe's relationship was with Hashem, it was too much. Even the closest of people could not actually come into that space. That space and experience of a closeness with Hashem was too much, even for Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Mefarshim, the Gemara, everyone you can imagine kind of struggles to understand. There seems to be some type of machloket between the psukim, what actually happened, what didn't. The psukim are contradicting themselves. And ultimately, there's a settling down around the fact that Hashem, kiviyachol, as it were, minimized himself and kind of became settled between the kruvim, between the winged lions, these winged beings that were on top of the Mishkan in the Kodesh Kedoshim. And it was from there that Hashem's, kind of glory emanated, and it allowed Moshe to enter the Mishkan. And the class that I had taken, citing the Rashbam, citing Rashi, citing the Ramban, points out this idea that even in our biggest moments, even Moshe's biggest moments, it was too overwhelming for him to actually be able to connect with Hashem, and goes on to discuss something that I think we've maybe talked about before in different bits and pieces, but this idea that our relationship with Hashem has moments of illumination and moments of confusion, moments where everything feels very clear and moments where everything feels not so clear. The Anan is cloudy, it's murky, it doesn't seem to be always something that we easily can understand. And the Aish is illuminating, it's bright, it's obvious, and not just in terms of understanding maybe what it is that's our mission, or what it is that's our job, or understanding the Torah, the halacha that's in front of us, but the recognition that the consistency of the reality that whether it's Anan or whether it's Aish, Hashem's presence is always there. And our avodah, our job as being part of this bayit that is referenced at the end of Parsha Shemot, is to contend with that our part of our worship of Hashem is to be able to engage and to lean in and to work to try to understand and to create that relationship with Hashem through more learning, through more knowledge, but settling on the fact that we're in this and we have a relationship, whether it's illuminating or whether it's cloudy, and that not everything always feels wonderful and hunky-dory and spiritual. Sometimes things feel hard, sometimes things feel confusing, sometimes things feel painful, sometimes we feel like we're locked in a cloud and we can't get out of it, and the recognition that we're not always, that our relationship with Hashem is not dependent on our ability to understand everything that is placed in front of us. I always kind of go back to my grandfather, who was a survivor of the Shoah, who would say, who was deeply religious and spiritual, but if you asked him how he came to understand the horrors he had experienced, he said, I don't, I have a lot of questions, I'd me'ev esrim shana, when I get to Shemaim, I have a lot of questions for Hashem. It was part of his avodah, it was part of his worship, the recognition that this is something that he's struggling with on a day-to-day basis. But he had that relationship, he was in it. And I'm thinking a little bit, kind of taking a pause for a second and flipping back over to the Beit HaMikdash and thinking about who Shlomo was and who David was. And David, it's kind of interesting, father, son, two totally different personalities. David is this small but mighty personality that we're introduced to that fights Goliath, and part of his fighting of Goliath is him kind of wandering out and saying, like, what is going on here? Like, where is the emunah Hashem? Why is everybody kind of like just standing around? Like, why aren't we going after these people? And that's his introduction to kind of going after and fighting Goliath. It kind of makes this proclamation. And he really personifies, at least I think so, a personality of emunah, a personality of belief. And that even in the moments where he is at fault, even in the most famous story, when he makes this, truly fatal error with Bathsheba, and Natan Hanavi comes to rebuke him, he gets it. It's this moment of like, oh my gosh, how could I not have seen it? Like, I am that man. Ani Haish, I am the man who stole this one person's sheep, and I could have had any of them. Chatati la Hashem, I have sinned. I have acted with arrogance and brazenness. And there is nothing, you think about that image of David HaMelech coming out from Hebron with the Mishkan, just wanting to bring it up to Yerushalayim. And part of his whole, falling apart with Michal is that she looks at him in such a, kind of like disgust way, like, why are you debasing yourself? And he's thinking to himself, like, what does that even mean? My whole world, my whole universe is just wrapped up in this emunah. It feels as though David HaMelech is kind of a representation of this man of emunah that is the fire that is illuminating. And Shlomo feels to me, I was just thinking about it a little bit tonight, like a totally different personality. There's so much emphasis on Shlomo being an ish chacham and ish navon, which is similar to the builders of the Mishkan, actually, right? We know that Bezalel, the language that's constantly talked about him and Eliav is this language of they were very smart. Hashem had given them a tremendous amount of knowledge. And you see, Shlomo kind of working to get to know people and kind of taking all of his intellectual prowess and intellectual knowledge and trying to bring it into his universe and think about things and turn it over. And in this way, he was a dayan par excellence by paying attention to the details of every story and kind of turning it over in his head. And in some ways, it was his own intellectualism, right, perhaps, that got him into trouble, right? We know that he kind of thought, okay, everybody else can't have too many horses because it will drive them to do this. And everybody else can't have too many wives because it will drive them to have this, but not me. And kind of a piece of him, which is so diametrically opposed to David, was this idea of kind of, like, I can intellectualize my way around everything. I can, and if I don't understand it, and I think it doesn't apply to me, then it's not going to matter to me, right? And his story is the fact that it does, that Hashem knows best, and it's our job to work to try to understand and accept as we're struggling to understand. And therefore, in some capacity, right, the idea of the Beit Hamikdash, which represents the pinnacle of our avodah, couldn't be opened up by Shlomo. It was built by Shlomo, but it couldn't be opened up by Shlomo. It had to have both components together. It had to have the chachma of Shlomo with the leiv and the eish of David HaMelech. And I think like that's where you see that kind of coming together as we enter the Beit HaMikdash. Interestingly enough, you can't, I think, at least because given the fact that we're headed into Rosh Chodesh Adar tonight, so Chodesh Tov, it's hard to start reading the Megillah without being immediately drawn back to the building of the Mishkan. In this week's Parsha, we see the same language when they're describing the weaving of the ephod, the weaving of the choshen with all these beautiful, bright, brilliant colors. You're immediately, I think, you're just like, it's the same material that was described in Achashverosh's palace. And actually in a class that I took this week by Rebbetzin Gedalia Geula Tursky, who's actually an old SAR teacher, she was spending a lot of time talking about the parallels between actually the structure itself of Achashverosh's palace and the Beit HaMikdash, and the imagery of people actually coming up to Achashverosh's palace, almost like carrying presents and animals as if they were being olel l'regal, and that actually at the entrance gate were these two kruvim. We have like actual archaeological evidence of this, and so that there was some type of replication, but how misguided, how off, right? Achashverosh thinking that he is Hamelech and Chas v'shalom Hamelech, right? And again, thinking about the fact that like the Mishkan is not, the Mishkan, the Beit HaMikdash is the opposite of all of those things. It's a spiritual, it's a spiritual in both moments, when it's clear and when it's not clear. It's our reflection of our relationship with Hashem. It's a reflection of our avodah with Hashem. When things are hard, when things are good, we go up and we turn to Hashem in our best moments and in our weakest moments, in our highest moments, in our saddest moments. If a woman who has given birth, whether she gave birth to a baby that was a stillbirth, or whether she gave birth to a baby that was alive, comes up to the Beit HaMikdash to bring a korban. Like that is to me such a powerful imagery in our best moments and in our hardest moments. And we're standing there in Yom Kippur, perhaps feeling the optimism of what is to come, but also feeling maybe the hardships of the year that has passed, or maybe the blessings of the year that has passed, and feeling the anxiety of the year that has come, settling in on that and thinking that this is a reflection of our avoda with Hashem, and we are leaning in. And Moshe, in some ways, in many ways, is kind of this example of that. And he stands there and he recognizes he can't get in, but somehow something changes and shapes for him. And we see a shift because Hashem wants Moshe to be able to access him, is the way that I kind of think about it. We want to be able to access the people in our, the people, the beings, the things that we have relationships with. And that leads me, of course, to our parenting moment, I guess, of the week. And as I mentioned last week, everybody's in this with me for the long haul in my Gottman training course. And that leads me to another key component in thinking about our relationships with our partners and our spouses, which is, are we updating our love maps, right? The Beit HaMikdash and the Mishkan is teaching us that relationships are ongoing. Relationships are continuous. It's not that we understand something in one moment and then we move on. Something we understand today, we may not understand tomorrow. Something that is clear may become unclear. Something that is unclear might become clear. It depends on where we're coming from. It depends on what we're thinking about. It depends on who we are and who the other person is, what our relationship is looking like. The Beit HaMikdash, the Mishkan, is a reflection of the fact that relationships are in flux, relationships are in motion. And if we're not keeping up with our relationships in motion, then we're going to get locked out. We're going to be unable to move them forward. We're going to be able to not be able to access them. And so thinking about the fact that Mishkan, Beit HaMikdash, it is the foundation, so too our homes, our Mikdash Ma'at. In our relationships with our partners and our spouses, are we investing time? Are we constantly building love maps? When we're sitting on a date, when we first, before we were married, or when we were engaged, and then maybe in our early years, maybe we're very good at building those love maps. What's your favorite this and what's your favorite that? But as the days go on, as the years go on, as people's lives get more complicated, are we pausing? Are we updating those love maps? Because you know what, your friends from 5 years ago, probably not your friends today. Maybe they might be. They might still be your best friends, but it's possible that they're not still your best friends. And the stressor of your day 5 years ago looks really different than it does today. Are we updating those? Are we updating our love maps, both in the small details and in the big details? And that requires being attentive. That requires taking time and space and really being inquisitive and making it a priority. People who are masters of relationships are people who are constantly updating their love maps. They're not satisfied with the love map that they had created about their partner when they were first getting to know each other. They're constantly updating it, and they're not just updating it, they're holding it, they're creating it. It's a map, right? Have you ever left your house and arrived at work, even though you were planning on going at work, but there's something that you know where you're supposed to be going, you know how to get there. Maybe work is the best example, the grocery store, shul, school, whatever it is. This idea that like we know how to get there. But if we're not constantly, updating it, then we're not actually going to be able to get there. We think we're on autopilot. Hey, I know how to get there. I know how to get to that place. I don't need to actually, look up the directions. I don't actually need to think about what time I need to leave. I don't actually have to pay attention to the signs on the road. No big deal. I can just keep going. And that's the mistake, right? So not just being conscious and conscientious about building those love maps, but also really listening, paying attention when our partner says something, right? It's similar to the bids that we talked about last week, but it's a little different. Really, really making it important and putting it in our brain. We can turn later and be like, I was reading an article about something you were talking about that was happening to you at work. Wow, connected. Feel so loving, feel so attentive, feel so respectful, feel a sense of admiration. Those are the things that make our relationships strong and loving and healthy. It's also, again, similar to those bids. We're thinking about the fact that everything that we do in our marriages and our relationships, it's good for the relationship, but it's good for the family. It's not just good for the family because, strong relationships can help us to build stronger homes, but also because it's actually showing our children about the ways in which they can be successful in the relationships that they have in their life, whether they're dating, whether they're just in the middle of learning how to make friends, right? Like asking your friend, oh, how was your day? Oh, what did you do yesterday? Right? We're teaching our children that the way that we connect to people, the way that we make friendships, the way that we develop relationships is by being inquisitive, by asking, and then holding that information because they're important to us. And if they're important to us, then we want to really think about those things and keep them in our brain because they're important to the person that we are looking at, and that person is important to us, and therefore it becomes important to ourselves. Okay, this week's Parsha. So first of all, I know, Shlosh Challah, what are you talking about? We got about 8 weeks to go. You got maybe even 10 weeks because it's like the Shabbos after Pesach. What are you talking about? But I feel like it's opening up the gates. It's like the keys to the gates. You could do gate Challah, also totally a win. This is the ephod. Okay, when I made the ephod in Challah a couple weeks ago, I did a really awful job, to be perfectly honest. I'm fine. I'm totally okay just calling that what it is. This is gorgeous. It is beautiful. It looks like they use like vegetables for that's where I got stuck. I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe I have all different color spices that could be the stones. And it didn't work. Turns out not so many spice colors out there. And then I was like doing mixed spices and sprinkles and like it wasn't sitting well with me. And I honestly don't love sprinkles on challah. Like I go with it, but I don't love it. Anyways, you don't need to hear about my challah drama, but that is part of the situation here. I'm loving it. I think I want to try it. I haven't exactly kind of figured it out, but I love it. I think it's awesome. It's amazing. There's shekel in this week's Parsha. So you could get silver coins that are chocolate. And also, I didn't put it up there, but Torah oodles, chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. It's such a celebration of the Torah and thinking about all the new things that we've learned in this past Sefer and the ways in which we can constantly be learning more and more, and that every little pasuk, every little word is a gem, and it's an opportunity to learn more than we knew the time that we read it before. And so, really encouraging all of us to celebrate the work that we've done, kind of together and learning, and chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek, and chodesh tov. I hope everybody has a wonderful month. Mishenichnas Adar, marbim b'simcha, and I hope it's a month filled with simcha and bracha.